A lot of people want to figure out how to be more motivated when working at home. Well, my advice to you would be three things. First of all, create a workspace that you actually want to be in. Second of all, create a schedule so that you know when you're going to be working. And then third of all, make sure that you're practicing good hygiene. That last one doesn't really pertain to this. It just helps us all out. So for this project, I wanted to create a workspace that I actually wanted to come to. I always tend to work better in an area that has the option for natural light. And it seems like such a weird thing to decorate your egress area, but my desk sits right next to this egress. And so I wanted to make it nice so that when I looked out, I would see something nicer than this lovely pile of garbage here. So I first started out by cleaning out the egress, power washing it. Then I went ahead and started to paint it. I'm going to prime it with an exterior undercoat, and it's tinted slightly gray. That's why it looks kind of blue. And that's just going to help me to paint over it. Next, I started to paint using two different shades of gray. I went ahead and started to paint each individual brick, but then remembered that I am going to have to paint in between the bricks as well. So I started to just do that lighter gray along the whole thing flat and then paint the individual bricks separately. So we have this concrete poured so that it looks like brick. Unfortunately, when it's just the one color like this, it doesn't actually resemble brick because they would have at least some fluctuation in color, at least between the brick and the mortar. Of course, I couldn't do just the egress because then I started to notice the shabby side garden. We used to use this area as a rainwater collection unit. However, we decided to move that, so I wanted to create a nice little garden here as well. And as with every other project, once you get started, it becomes a much bigger project than you expected. I noticed that the weeds were creeping up, and so I decided to put a small patio. I started out this process by fire weeding. You want to be really, really careful if you're doing this. Make sure you're just doing it after a rain when the ground is nice and soaked. You want to make sure that you don't have anything flammable nearby, and you want to make sure that you do have quite a bit of water on hand just in case you do need to put out a fire. But other than that, other than the very dangerous part of it, I highly recommend fire weeding. It has helped me out tremendously. Now, here's something to keep in mind. I am not creating a permanent patio here. Please note that the techniques that I'm using here are not for a permanent patio. If they were, I would put in, some stone dust. I would tamp everything down. I would do a much bigger process. But in this case, I really just want to put the pavers there to keep the weeds from growing up and to make it so that I have a little bit of an area to step out on. Probably tell that I'm showing you things a little bit out of order. Turns out, I did the patio before painting, but this was months ago. I'm just doing the best I can here, guys. When I used these, I was cutting the pavers into segments a quarter at a time, so that way I could easily reuse them if need be. So as I cut the pavers, I have a little pond pump going just to keep the dust down. The silica dust is incredibly harmful to breathe in, so I am using a mask for this, but I'm also doing it outdoors, and I am also actually covering my hair because those fine particulates, especially if you have long hair, they will get stuck in your hair. It'll be like having clay in your hair. It's nasty and it's not particularly good for you either. So please just make sure that you're taking a bunch of necessary precautions just to keep those out of your lungs. And then it became time to pop a cap on top of the brick wall, I guess you would want to say. I wanted to give it a finished top. I felt like having some sort of a cap on there would definitely clean up the top of that concrete so you can't tell as much that it's just a concrete pour. I did look into a lot of different materials. In this case, I decided to go with a vinyl. This is a great material because it's going to allow me to just power wash it, not have to paint it. It's going to be extremely low maintenance for me. That being said, it is not cool to cut either. So you want to make sure that when you're using this, you're cutting it with a mask on, you're protecting yourself because all that plastic gets to be airborne. You want to make sure that you're being careful. I'm creating a series of miter cuts on this so that I can join it together, and then that way the vinyl will look like it's a little bit thicker. This is not necessary. You could always get a thicker piece of wood if you wanted to use that, but vinyl is particularly expensive, so I wanted to really try to get as much mileage out of it as I could. Next came the gardening part, which honestly is one of my favorites, so I'll be a little bit more in depth about what I planted for that. I had some self-watering boxes, fortunately, that my mom could no longer use, so she gave them to me. I got those for free. Free is always fun. Now, if you're not used to gardening, one of the typical rules of creating pots is that you want to use a thriller, a filler, and a spiller, meaning something that shoots up, something that fills the pot, and something that spills over the pot. For this one, I first planted some osteospermum, which was going to be used as the thriller, so I put that in the center. The reason why is because that's going to shoot higher than the plants that I'm using inside of the rest of the planter box. For the filler, I used some Calabar Koa. Now, here's a favorite little trick of mine. I was able to pick up this hanging basket, and typically when you get something that's very full, it's because the growers have planted more than one plant in there. So typically it's going to have maybe 3 or more plants to a pot. This one's already bursting at the seams, and it's only the beginning of the season. So I'm going to go ahead and split apart those 3 different plants and spread them throughout my planter and give them not only more room to grow, but I get 3 for the price of 1. Although I'm using the Calabar Koa as a filler, it's also going to spill over as well. For that, I also used some alyssum to spill over so that there'd be some little white flecks. And I felt like that would look really nice when I'm looking out the window and there's some flowers cascading down the wall. To fill the rest of it out, I used some dianthus, which was really awesome because it continued to bloom actually through December, surprisingly. So shout out to Catoctin Mountain Growers, making really awesome plants. I also had a full flat of them from a sale that they put on, so I was able to take all of these plants and then mimic them in the garden below. I started that side garden with a combination of annuals and perennials, meaning ones that are just here for the year to give a big bang, and perennials, come back each year. So I had a hosta that I had to split up, which is huge. So it looks really small here. It actually did end up, even though I chopped it into tiny pieces, it still ended up blooming that same year. And there is a nice little camellia there in the corner. We'll see how that does because I ended up picking up the wrong one that I wasn't planning on. And it requires a little bit more warmth than my zone. However, I think it might be okay in this protected corner here. Camellias thrive in protected edges like this. Long-term wise, that large hosta will grow much bigger, and so will the camellia, and it will pretty much take up the bulk of this bed, making it a pretty low maintenance bed in the future. However, for immediate gratification, I went ahead and planted some annuals. I put in some angelonia, a little bit more of that Calabar Koa, some alyssum, and more of that dianthus, which still, once again, kept on going through December. Before mulching, I made sure to water everything in really well, and then I went ahead and started to edge the bed to give it just a little bit of a cleaner edge. It's one of the easiest and quickest ways to make your garden bed look super professional. Then when I went to mulch, I used my favorite trick. I save the pots when I'm planting anything, really, and then start to shove the plants inside the pot and then mulch over top of them. And once I'm finished mulching, I just pop the pots right off. This does several things. First of all, I don't like to mulch and then plant because then the dirt that I take out always seems to end up all over the mulch, ruining my nice finished look. So I always like to plant and then mulch. By putting the pots on top, it makes sure that mulch and dust and whatnot doesn't get on my beautiful blooms. But then conveniently, it also creates this really nice water well where the water can get to my plants, but not as easily to the weeds. The day that I started doing that, I was so proud of myself. By the end of it, I carved out a nice little spot just for myself that will help to motivate me to actually get some work done.